The orbital palace of the Kathrani Dominion hung in the black silence of space like a jewel no one was allowed to touch. It circled the dragon homeworld of Firketh once every 9 hours, and from the highest floor, the view was enough to make any living creature feel either very large or very small. Tonight, Empress Virathan Dorkali felt small. She sat in her hover wheelchair near the observation window, her clawed hands resting on the armrests, her golden eyes reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Tomorrow was her birthday, her 1,200th birthday, and no one had said a word about it. Not her guards, who stood like statues at every corridor junction. Not her advisors, who filled her days with reports about trade disputes and border skirmishes. Not the hundreds of dragon nobles who bowed so low when she passed that their horns nearly scraped the floor. They all feared her. They all respected her. But none of them knew her. And none of them, she was certain, cared whether she smiled or wept behind the closed doors of her private quarters. Virathan was not always like this. 3 centuries ago, she had been the most feared warrior queen in known space. During the HFY War, when the Nythiri swarm had torn through the outer colonies, she had led the counterattack herself. She had fought in the burning skies above Kalthari Prime, her wings spread wide, her fire turning enemy ships to ash. She had been unstoppable. She had been glorious. And then on the last day of the war, she had made a choice. A colony ship carrying 40,000 civilians had drifted into the path of the Nythiri plasma barrage. The ship had no shields, no weapons, no chance. Virathan had thrown herself between the barrage and the ship, taking a plasma lance directly through her lower spine. The civilians survived, every single one of them. Virathan never walked again. They could regenerate lost limbs, heal burns in days, survive the vacuum of space for short periods. But the plasma lance had been laced with necrotic energy. A Nythiri weapon designed to kill things that should not be killable. The wound never healed. The nerves never reconnected. And so the greatest dragon warrior in history became the Empress in the wheelchair. Her people called her the Unbroken Queen. They built statues of her. They wrote songs. They taught their children about her sacrifice. And then, slowly, over the decades and centuries, they stopped seeing her as a warrior and started seeing her as something fragile, something to be protected, something to be pitied. Virathan hated pity more than she had ever hated the Nythiri. The door to her quarters hissed open, and Chancellor Sathos entered. He was tall even by dragon standards, with dark iron-colored scales and eyes like polished obsidian. He carried a data tablet and wore the expression of someone who had already decided how the conversation would go. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing precisely the correct amount, "I have the diplomatic briefings for tomorrow's schedule." "Tomorrow," Virathan said quietly, "is my birthday." Sathos glanced at his tablet. "Yes, the ceremonial reception is scheduled for midday. The Tarathi ambassador will attend, along with representatives from the human delegation. Standard protocol." He swiped to the next page. "There is also a minor maintenance issue on the lower levels. The water recycling system in sublevel 9 has failed. We have been forced to contract a human plumber, as our own engineers consider the work beneath their station." Virathan stared at him. He had moved past her birthday in less than 3 seconds. She wanted to tell him that she was tired, that she was lonely, that she would trade every ceremonial reception in the galaxy for one person who would sit with her and talk about nothing. But she was the Empress, and Empresses did not say such things. "Fine," she said. "Handle it." Sathos bowed again and left. The door closed behind him, and the silence returned, heavy and familiar. Virathan turned back to the window. The stars did not care that she was sad. They never had. 2 floors below the Empress's quarters, and several hundred levels down from anything important, a docking port hissed open, and a human man stepped onto the station, carrying a toolbox in one hand and a duffel bag over his shoulder. Danny Russo was 34 years old, 5'10", and had the kind of face that looked like it had been assembled in a hurry, but worked well enough. He had dark hair that needed cutting, a 2-day beard that needed shaving, and a pair of steel-toed boots that had seen more alien space stations than most diplomats. He was a plumber, not a soldier, not an explorer, not a diplomat, a plumber, and he was fine with that. His communicator buzzed, and his sister's face appeared on the small screen. "Danny, please tell me you're not going to do anything stupid on this one," Maggie said. She was 29, sharper than him in every measurable way, and the only person in the universe who could make him feel guilty with a single look. "Define stupid," Danny said, walking through the docking corridor. "Insulting an alien, starting a fight, getting banned from another station." "That was one time, Maggie. It was 3 times. The third one wasn't my fault." He shifted his toolbox to his other hand. "Relax. It's a plumbing job. I fix the pipes, I get paid, I leave. Simple. You always say that. And it's always true." "It's never true, Danny." He grinned and ended the call just as a woman in a crisp human military uniform appeared at the end of the corridor. She had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and the look of someone who had already written 3 reports about him in her head. "Danny Russo," she said. "That's me. Lieutenant Kira Novak, human military attaché. I'm your point of contact while you're aboard. A few ground rules." She fell into step beside him. "The Kethrani are proud, formal, and they don't have much patience for humans. Keep your head down, do your job, don't talk to anyone you don't need to talk to, and whatever you do, stay out of the upper levels. That's the Empress's private residence." Danny nodded. "Fix pipes. Don't bother the Dragon Queen." "I'm serious, Russo." "So am I." She handed him a translated map of the station on a datapad and pointed him toward a service elevator at the far end of the corridor. Danny thanked her, stepped inside, and punched in the sub-level code from the map. The elevator hummed. The doors closed. And then, because the translation software had rendered the Kethrani numeral for 9 as the Kethrani numeral for the Empress's private floor, the elevator began to rise instead of descend. Danny didn't notice. He was reading the work order on his datapad and thinking about how much he was going to charge for overtime. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. And Danny Russo, human plumber from Newark, New Jersey, stepped out onto the most restricted floor in the entire Kethrani Dominion. He looked up from his datapad, looked around at the dark gemstone walls and the air that smelled like cedar and lightning, and said, "This doesn't look like Sublevel 9. It was not Sublevel 9. It was not even close. Danny stood in the corridor and tried to figure out where he was. The walls were made of something dark and polished, veined with thin lines of gold that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. The ceiling was high, much higher than it needed to be, and the air had a strange weight to it, like the station itself was holding its breath. This was obviously not a maintenance sublevel. Maintenance sublevels did not have gemstone walls. They had rust and bad lighting and the smell of recycled air. He tapped the datapad a few times, trying to pull up the station map again, but the translation software had frozen. He muttered something unkind about alien technology and started walking, figuring he would find another elevator or a stairwell, or at least someone who could point him in the right direction. He turned a corner and stopped. There was a dragon sitting by a massive observation window at the end of a wide, empty hallway. She was in humanoid form, which Danny had learned was how most dragons presented themselves on space stations. It was easier on the architecture. Even seated in her hover wheelchair, she was tall. Her scales were a deep dark violet, edged with silver along her jaw and the ridges above her eyes. Her hands rested on the arms of the chair, and her golden eyes were fixed on the stars outside the window. She looked like someone who had been sitting there for a very long time. Danny's first instinct was to back away quietly before she noticed him. His second instinct, which was usually the one that got him in trouble, was to say something. He went with the second one. "Hey," he said. "Sorry to bother you. Elevator sent me to the wrong floor. You know how to get to sub-level 9 from here?" The dragon turned her head slowly and looked at him. Her expression was impossible to read at first, a mix of surprise and something harder. She studied him the way a scientist might study an insect that had landed on an important document. Danny had been looked at like that before. It didn't bother him much. "You are human," she said. Her voice was low and smooth, like the sound of a river moving over deep stone. "Last time I checked," Danny said. "And you are on this floor?" "Not on purpose. Like I said, wrong elevator. The translation thing on this pad is broken, I think." She continued to stare at him. Danny noticed that she was not calling for guards. She was not pressing any alarm. She was just sitting there, watching him, as if she was waiting to see what he would do next. He also noticed something else. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from a long day, the kind that came from a long life. He should have left. He knew that. Kira had told him to stay out of the upper levels. He was probably standing in the most restricted part of the station. Any second now, a guard would round the corner, and he would be in serious trouble. But the woman in the wheelchair looked like she had been sitting alone in this hallway for 100 years. And Danny Russo had never been able to walk away from someone who looked like that. "You all right?" he asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in confusion. "What?" "I asked if you're all right. You look like you're having a rough night." "I am having a perfectly adequate night," she said, though her voice betrayed nothing of the sort. Danny set his toolbox down on the floor and sat cross-legged across from her, his back against the opposite wall. "Yeah, that's what people say when they're having a rough night." "You are very bold for someone who is lost." "My sister says the same thing. She uses different words, though." The faintest twitch appeared at the corner of the dragon's mouth. Not a smile, not yet, but the ghost of one. "What are you doing on this station?" she asked. "Plumbing job. Your water recycler on sub-level 9 is busted. They hired me to fix it." "You are a plumber?" "Yep." "And you are sitting on the floor of a restricted corridor, talking to a stranger instead of doing your job. The floor's comfortable, and you looked like you could use the company." He shrugged. "Besides, my job isn't going anywhere. Broken pipes stay broken until someone fixes them. That's the nice thing about plumbing. It's patient." She looked at him for a long time, and Danny could feel her measuring him. Not his strength, not his rank, not his usefulness, just him. It was the kind of look that made a person either very nervous or very honest. Danny went with honest. "I'm Danny," he said. "Danny Russo, from Newark, New Jersey." "Earth." "I know where New Jersey is," she said dryly. "Most humans don't, so I figured I'd be safe." That almost earned a laugh. Almost. She tilted her head slightly and said, "You may call me Virathan." "Virathan." He tested the name. "That's a good name. Strong. Sounds like it could break something." "It has," she said quietly. They talked. Danny did most of the talking at first, because he was good at it, and because she seemed content to listen. He told her about his life, the plumbing jobs on alien stations, the different species he had worked for, the time he accidentally flooded a Tarathi ambassador's bathroom and nearly caused a diplomatic incident. He told her about his father, who had been a plumber back in Newark, and how Danny had followed him into the trade because it was the only thing that ever made sense to him. He told her about Maggie, his sister, who was smarter than him and never let him forget it. She listened the way someone listens when they have not been listened to in a very long time, with quiet attention and something close to hunger. And slowly, she began to talk too. She told him she had lived on this station for a long time. She told him the view from this window was the best on the station, and that she came here most nights because the silence was better than the noise downstairs. She did not tell him she was the Empress. She did not tell him about the war or the wound or the centuries. She just talked, carefully and softly, like someone testing ice before stepping onto it. Danny asked her about the wheelchair. He did it simply, without awkwardness, the way he might ask someone about a scar or a tattoo. "Old injury," she said, "a long time ago." "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore. Not the way it used to." He nodded. "My dad had bad knees from 30 years of crawling under sinks. He used to say, the body remembers even when the pain forgets." Virathan looked at him with an expression he could not name. "Your father sounds like he was wise." "He was a plumber." "Same thing sometimes." They sat in silence for a while after that, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people have said enough to trust the quiet between them. Eventually Danny stood, picked up his toolbox, and said he should probably find the actual sublevel 9 before someone noticed he was missing. Virathan told him the correct elevator was at the end of the adjacent corridor, and gave him the right code for the sublevel. He thanked her, hesitated, and then said, "I hope your night gets better, Virathan." "It already has," she said, and this time she did smile. Just barely, just for a moment, but it was real. Danny found the right elevator, descended to sublevel 9, and got to work on the water recycler. The pipes were worse than the work order had described. It would take at least 2 or 3 days. He didn't mind. The station was interesting, the pay was decent, and the sad dragon lady on the top floor was the most honest conversation he had had in months. He was tightening a coupling joint when Kira Novak's voice crackled through his communicator. "Russo, status report. Found the recycler. It's a mess. Going to need a few days." "Fine. Stay on sublevel 9, and stay out of the upper floors." Danny paused. "About that, quick question. Who lives on the top floor of this station?" There was a long silence. Then Kira said very carefully, "That is the Empress's private residence, the personal quarters of Empress Virathan Dorkali, supreme ruler of the Kathrani Dominion." "Why are you asking?" Danny closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. "No reason." "Russo." "No reason, Lieutenant. Good night." He ended the call, stared at the pipe in his hands, and whispered to himself, "The Empress? Of course it was the Empress." He went back to work, but he could not stop thinking about the way she had smiled. The morning of Empress Virathan Dorkali's 1200th birthday began the way all official mornings began on the Kathrani Orbital Palace, with ceremony, precision, and absolutely no warmth. The grand reception hall was enormous. The ceiling rose so high that clouds of station mist gathered near the top, drifting between crystal chandeliers that burned with contained dragon fire. The floor was polished obsidian, and every surface reflected the hundreds of dragon nobles who stood in their finest armor and robes, arranged by rank, by bloodline, by political alliance. Everything was in order. Everything was perfect, and none of it meant anything. Virathan sat at the head of the hall on her throne chair, a specially designed hover wheelchair built into a seat of dark iron and violet gemstone. It was beautiful and powerful, and it made her look exactly the way the court wanted her to look. Like a symbol. A symbol. One by one, the nobles approached and bowed. They offered ritual congratulations in the old dragon tongue. Words that had been spoken at royal birthdays for 10,000 years. Each phrase was correct. Each bow was measured to the exact degree appropriate for their rank. And each noble, after delivering their words, stepped back and returned to their position without once looking her in the eye. Chancellor Sathos stood to the right of the throne, managing the flow of the procession with quiet efficiency. He nodded to each noble as they approached, subtly controlling the pace, ensuring no one lingered too long, ensuring no one said anything unscripted. He was very good at his job. He had spent 2 centuries making sure the Empress was always surrounded by people and never accompanied by anyone. Ambassador Cole Bennett stood near the back of the hall with the small human delegation. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with gray at his temples and the careful posture of someone who had spent decades navigating rooms where he was not entirely welcome. He watched the procession with quiet attention. "Is it always like this?" he asked Kira, who stood beside him. "Like what, sir?" "Like a funeral with better lighting." Kira glanced at the Empress. Virathan's face was composed, regal, and completely empty. She was performing. Every smile, every nod, every gracious word was a performance, and she had been performing for so long that the court had forgotten there was a real person underneath. "She looks like she'd rather be anywhere else," Bennett said. "With respect, sir, there's nothing we can do about it. Humans are barely tolerated at these events. We're here because protocol requires it." Bennett nodded and said nothing more, but he kept watching. Virathan received gifts, rare minerals, ancient texts, a sword that had belonged to a legendary dragon general. Every gift was political. Every gift was calculated. Not one of them was personal. Not one of them said, "I know you, I thought of you. I wanted you to have this because it would make you happy." When it was over, the hall emptied with the same mechanical precision with which it had filled. The nobles departed in order of rank. The servants cleared the tables. The chandeliers dimmed, and Virathan was alone. She guided her wheelchair through the private corridor that led back to her quarters. The guards stepped aside as she passed. No one walked with her. No one asked if she needed anything. The corridor was long and quiet, and the sound of her wheelchair's hum was the only thing that kept it from being silent. She reached the observation window, her window, the one she had sat beside for centuries, and stopped. The stars were still there. They didn't care that she was 1,200 years old. They didn't care that she had spent the most important day of her year surrounded by hundreds of people and had felt more alone than if she had been drifting in empty space. She sat there and let the silence settle around her like dust. 2 floors below and several levels down, Danny Russo was elbow-deep in a corroded water recycling unit when a dragon servant passed through the maintenance corridor carrying a tray of leftover ceremonial food. "What's the occasion?" Danny asked, nodding at the tray. The servant looked at him with the mild confusion that most dragons showed when a human spoke to them unprompted. "It is the Empress's birthday," the servant said, "the 1200th, a sacred milestone." Danny paused. His wrench stopped moving. He looked at the servant and said, "Today is her birthday?" "Yes." "Right now?" "The reception concluded 1 hour ago. The Empress has retired to her quarters." The servant continued down the corridor and disappeared around a corner. Danny stood there, hands still on the pipe, staring at nothing. He thought about the woman by the window. The tired eyes, the almost smile, the way she had said, "It already has," when he told her he hoped her night would get better. That was the Empress, the ruler of 12 star systems. And today was her birthday, and she had gone back to her quarters alone. Danny wiped his hands on his work pants. He looked at the pipes around him, the welding tools on the floor, the scraps of metal he had cut away during repairs. He picked up a piece of curved pipe, about the length of his forearm, and turned it over in his hands. Then he picked up another piece, and another. He sat down on the floor of sublevel 9 and started welding. It took him 40 minutes. He burned his thumb twice, and had to redo the base 3 times. But when he was done, he held up his creation and examined it. It was a flower, a crude, imperfect, slightly lopsided flower, made from welded pipe scraps. The petals were uneven, the stem was too thick. It looked like something a child might make in a workshop class and bring home to their mother. Danny looked at it and decided it was perfect. He rode the elevator up. This time, he knew exactly where he was going. He punched in the code for the Empress's private floor, the same code Virathan had given him the night before, and stood in the rising elevator with a piped flower in one hand and his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. Instead, she saw a human plumber in dirty work clothes, holding something made of metal, walking toward her with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who does not fully understand the situation they are in. "Hey," Danny said. "Heard it was your birthday. Didn't have time to find a card." He held out the pipe flower. Virathan looked at it. She looked at him. She looked at the flower again. It was ugly. It was clumsy. It was the most genuine thing anyone had given her in longer than she could remember. She laughed. It came out of her like something that had been locked away, sudden and raw and real. Not the polite, measured sound she used in court. A real laugh. The kind that comes from a place so deep inside a person that they forgot it was there. Danny grinned. "I'll take that as a good review. You are either the bravest or the dumbest human I have ever met," she said, and her voice was different now, younger, somehow. "Probably both," he said. He sat down on the floor across from her, same spot as last night, and leaned back against the wall. "So, happy birthday, Virathan." She held the pipe flower in her clawed hands and turned it slowly, examining it from every angle. "You know who I am," she said. It was not a question. "Yeah, I figured it out after we talked. The big throne downstairs was a hint. And you came back. You looked like you could use a flower." She set the flower gently on her lap and looked at him. "Tell me about your world, Danny Russo. Tell me about Newark, New Jersey." So he did. He told her about the streets, the diners, the sound of the train at night. He told her about his father's old plumbing van and the way it smelled like coffee and pipe grease. He told her about Maggie and how she was going to kill him when she found out he was having tea with an alien empress. She told him about the HFY War. She told him about the plasma lance, the colony ship, the moment she felt her legs stop working and knew they would never work again. She told him about the centuries since, the slow slide from warrior to figurehead, the way people stopped talking to her and started talking at her. Danny listened. He did not flinch. He did not look at her with pity. He did not try to fix her, or inspire her, or tell her it would be all right. He just listened, the way a person listens when they actually care about the answer. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That sounds rough. But you're still here, right? That counts for something." She closed her eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "I am still here." They sat together by the window, and outside, the stars burned on. In a distant security office, a screen flashed a notification. The human contractor had entered the Empress's private floor for the second time. Chancellor Sathos read the alert, and his dark eyes hardened into something cold and deliberate. He closed the screen and began to think. Chancellor Sathos moved quickly. He had not held power for 2 centuries by being slow, and he understood better than anyone that the most dangerous threats were not the ones that came with armies. They were the ones that came with kindness. The morning after the Empress's birthday, he filed a formal security complaint with the station's command office. The complaint stated that a human contractor, one Danny Russo, plumber, no diplomatic status, no security clearance, had accessed the Empress's private floor on 2 separate occasions without authorization. It described the incidents as a breach of sovereign security protocols and recommended the immediate removal of the contractor from the station. He sent a copy to Ambassador Cole Bennett with a note that was polite in the way that sharp things are sometimes polite. It suggested that the human delegation take responsibility for its contractor's behavior and arrange his departure before the matter became a formal diplomatic issue. Bennett read the note in his office and set it down carefully on his desk. He looked at Kira, who stood across from him with her arms folded. "What do we know about this plumber?" Bennett asked. "Danny Russo, 34, independent contractor, good work record, no criminal history, a few minor incidents on other stations, nothing serious. He's loud, he's casual, and he apparently wandered onto the Empress's private floor because the station's translation software gave him the wrong elevator code." "And the second visit?" Kira hesitated. "That one was deliberate. He went back on his own." Bennett rubbed his temples. "To do what?" "I don't know, sir, but the Chancellor is using it as leverage. If we don't pull Russo out, Sathos will escalate this to a formal protest, and we'll lose standing with the Kethrani court." Bennett understood the politics. The human presence in the Kethrani Dominion was fragile. They were tolerated, sometimes respected, but never fully accepted. One wrong move could set diplomatic relations back years, and a plumber sneaking onto the Empress's private floor was exactly the kind of wrong move that made diplomats lose sleep. "Recall him," Bennett said. "Get him on the next transport." Kira nodded and left. She found Danny on sublevel 9, halfway inside a wall panel, replacing a corroded section of pipe. She told him plainly, the Chancellor had filed a complaint. His access to the station was being revoked. A transport would arrive in 6 hours. He needed to pack his tools and go. Danny pulled himself out of the wall and looked at her. There was grease on his forehead, and his knuckles were scraped raw from working in tight spaces. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "Yeah," he said. "I figured that was coming." "You went back up there, Russo, after I told you not to." "I know." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, looking at the pipe in his hands. Then he said, "Because it was her birthday, and nobody brought her anything." Kira opened her mouth, closed it, and then said something she probably should not have said. "I'm sorry, Danny." He shrugged and started packing his toolbox. "Not your fault. I knew the rules. I just thought the rules were stupid." 3 floors above, in a chamber filled with morning light from the observation windows, Virathan Dorkali felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like the day ahead of her had something in it worth reaching for. She did not know what Danny Russo would say the next time she saw him. She did not know if he would come back. But the possibility that he might was enough to make the silence in her quarters feel different. Less heavy, less permanent. She placed the pipe flower on the small table beside her window. It sat there, ugly and crooked and real, next to ancient artifacts worth more than some planets. It was the only thing in the room she had not earned through war or received through obligation. Someone had made it for her because they wanted to. That simple fact changed the shape of the day. She sent a servant to the lower levels with an invitation. Tea, in her private quarters, an old dragon custom reserved for those the Empress considered worthy of personal time. The servant bowed and departed. 20 minutes later, the servant returned. He stood in the doorway and hesitated in a way that told Virathan everything she needed to know before he opened his mouth. "Your Majesty," he said, "the human contractor has been reassigned. He is being removed from the station by order of Chancellor Sathos. His transport departs in 5 hours." The room went very still. Virathan's hands tightened on the arms of her wheelchair. Her claws left marks in the metal. Her golden eyes, which had been warm and almost soft just moments ago, turned cold and bright, like the core of a dying star. "By whose authority?" she asked. Her voice was quiet. That was the dangerous part. "The Chancellor's, Your Majesty. He filed a security complaint regarding the humans' unauthorized access to your private floor. I see, Virathan said. Summon the Chancellor. Now. Sethos arrived 12 minutes later. He entered the Empress's quarters with the same composed, confident posture he always carried. He bowed correctly. He stood at the appropriate distance. He waited for her to speak first, as protocol demanded. You remove the human, Virathan said. I addressed a security breach, Your Majesty. The contractor accessed your private floor twice without clearance. Standard protocol requires. I did not ask about protocol. I asked about the human. You removed him from this station without consulting me. Sithos's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalculation. Your Majesty, the contractor is a civilian with no diplomatic standing. His presence on your private floor was a violation of... His presence on my floor was at my invitation. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Sithos recovered quickly. Your Majesty, I was not informed of any such invitation. If the contractor was your guest, I apologize for the misunderstanding. However, I would advise that entertaining unvetted human civilians in your private quarters may create complications. The court will have questions. The noble houses will do what they have always done, Virathan said. They will scheme. They will measure their words and calculate their advantages, none of which concerns me. She guided her wheelchair forward, closer to Sethos. The Chancellor, for the first time in as long as anyone could remember, took a small step back. I have been watching you, Sethos, she said. Not today, not this week, for years. You manage my schedule. You control who enters this floor. You decide which messages reach me and which do not. You have built a wall around me, and you have done it so carefully, so slowly, that I almost did not notice. Sethos's jaw tightened. Everything I have done has been in service of your safety and the stability of the Dominion. Everything you have done has been in service of your control over me. A lonely empress is an empress who relies on her chancellor. You did not keep me safe, Sethos. You kept me isolated. There is a difference. The confrontation hung in the air between them, like heat before a fire. Sethos did not admit it. He did not need to. They both knew the truth. He bowed stiffly and left. But he did not stop. Within the hour, he began reaching out to dragon nobles, whose loyalty he had cultivated over the decades. He planted the seed carefully. The Empress was becoming erratic. She was entertaining humans in her private quarters. She was compromised. Perhaps, for the good of the Dominion, the Council should consider whether she was still fit to rule. The machinery of betrayal was quiet and efficient, just like the man who built it. Down at the docking port, Danny sat on his duffel bag, with his toolbox beside him, waiting for the transport. He stared at the floor and thought about pipe flowers and golden eyes and the sound of a laugh that had been locked away for centuries. His communicator buzzed. He looked at it. The message was from a frequency he did not recognize. High priority, encrypted, marked with the imperial seal of the Kathrani Dominion. He opened it. The message was short. It read, "Do not leave, V." Danny stared at it for a long time. Then his communicator buzzed again. This time it was Kira. "Russo, we have a situation. Bennett is pulling some strings. There might be a way to keep you on the station, but you'd technically be registered as a cultural liaison attached to the human delegation. It's a fiction, and everyone will know it's a fiction, but it's legal." "A cultural liaison," Danny said flatly. "It was Bennett's idea. He thinks this could actually help our standing if we play it right. The Empress has apparently been very clear that she wants you to stay." Danny closed his eyes. He thought about Maggie, who was going to have a lot of questions. He thought about Sub-Level 9, where the pipes were still broken. He thought about the observation window, and the woman who sat beside it every night, because the silence was better than the noise. "Yeah," he said. "I'll stay." He picked up his toolbox and walked back into the station. The elevator took him up. The doors opened onto the dark gemstone corridor. He walked to the window. Virathan was there. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and her expression was something Danny had never seen on her face before. Relief. "You came back," she said. Danny set his toolbox down and sat on the floor across from her. "Pipe's still not fixed," he said. "I don't leave a job half done." She looked at him, and in her ancient golden eyes, something warm and fragile and unbreakable settled into place. "No," she said softly. "It took Scythos 1 week to build his case. He worked quietly, the way he had always worked, through whispers, through favors owed, through the careful arrangement of facts into a shape that served his purpose. He spoke to the heads of the 6 great dragon houses. He reminded them of old debts. He painted a picture of an empress who had grown unstable, distracted, and dangerously attached to a human with no rank, no title, and no place in their world. 3 of the 6 houses agreed to support a vote of confidence, a formal council procedure that had not been invoked in over 800 years. It was a polite word for a challenge. If the council voted that the Empress was unfit, she would be removed from power, not by force, by law, and Scythos as chancellor would assume temporary rule until a successor was chosen. He scheduled the session for the 7th day after the Empress's birthday. He did not inform Virathan. By the time she learned of it, the votes would already be counted. But Scythos had made a mistake. He had spent 2 centuries studying the Empress's isolation, her loneliness, her slow retreat from the world. He had built his entire strategy around the woman she had become, tired, withdrawn, and easy to manage. He had not considered the possibility that she might stop being that woman. On the morning of the council session, Virathan received a message from Ambassador Bennett. It was brief and careful, the way diplomatic warnings always were. It told her that Scythos had convened a vote of confidence. It told her which houses supported him, and it told her the session would begin in 2 hours. Virathan read the message in her quarters, sitting by the observation window with the pipe flower on the table beside her. She was not surprised. She had felt Scythos pulling away from her all week, his reports growing shorter, his visits less frequent. She had ruled for 1,200 years. She knew what betrayal looked like before it arrived. She sat quietly for a few minutes. Then she called Danny. He answered from sub-level 9, where he was finishing the last repairs on the water recycler. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" "The Chancellor is trying to remove me from power. There is a council vote in 2 hours. There was a pause. Then Danny said, "Do you need me to come up there?" "No. I need you to stay where you are." "Virathan, I have fought wars, Danny. I have broken fleets and burned empires. I can handle a council meeting." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the edge beneath it. "I simply wanted to hear your voice before I went in." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to be fine. You know that, right?" "I know. And if anyone gives you trouble, I know a guy who's really good with a wrench." It was small and quiet, and it lasted only a second, but it was enough. She ended the call and guided her wheelchair toward the council chamber. The chamber was old. It had been built into the bones of the station during its original construction, centuries ago, and its walls were lined with the carved histories of every empress and emperor who had ruled the Kathrani dominion. The ceiling was high and dark, lit by slow-burning dragon lanterns that cast long shadows across the floor. The 6 heads of the great houses sat in a semicircle on elevated seats. Scythos stood at the center, behind a podium carved from black stone. When Virathan entered, every head turned. The chamber was designed to make the person at its center feel small. It did not work on her. She guided her wheelchair to the center of the floor and stopped. She did not bow. She simply looked at each of them, one by one, with the golden eyes of a woman who had seen more centuries than all of them combined. Sethos spoke first. He was calm, measured, and precise. He laid out his case with the skill of someone who had been building arguments for 200 years. The Empress, he said, had shown signs of compromised judgment. She had invited an unvetted alien civilian into her private quarters. She had overruled security protocols on the basis of personal attachment. She had, in his words, allowed sentiment to cloud her capacity for governance. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The facts, arranged the way he had arranged them, spoke clearly enough. When he finished, the chamber was silent. The 6 house leaders looked at Virathan. 3 of them had already decided to vote against her. 1 had not been contacted by Sethos at all, and sat watching with cautious interest. Virathan let the silence hold for a long time. Long enough for it to become uncomfortable. Long enough for the weight of the room to shift from Sethos's words to her presence. And then she spoke. She did not defend Danny. She did not mention him by name. She did not argue against the charges Sethos had laid out, because she understood something Sethos did not. The council members were not afraid of a human plumber. They were afraid of what it meant that their Empress had chosen someone outside their control. Instead, she talked about the HFY War. She spoke simply, without drama, without the formal cadence the court expected. She told them about the last battle above Kalthari Prime. She told them about the colony ship, the 40,000 civilians, the moment she had chosen to fly between them and the plasma barrage. She told them what it felt like when the lance went through her spine. She told them about the silence that followed, floating in the wreckage, unable to feel her legs, unable to move, watching the colony ship drift safely away. I did not make that choice because I was brave, she said. I made it because there were people who needed someone to stand between them and the fire. That was my purpose. That was my duty. And it cost me my legs and 3 centuries of pain. She paused. The chamber was utterly still. After the war, I returned to this throne. I ruled, I served. And slowly, so slowly that I did not see it happening, the people around me stopped treating me as their Empress, and started treating me as a thing to be managed. My schedule was controlled. My visitors were filtered. My loneliness was not an accident. It was a strategy. A lonely Empress does not ask questions. A lonely Empress does not push back. A lonely Empress sits by her window and watches the stars and trusts that the people around her are acting in her interest. She turned to Sethos. Her eyes were bright and hard and ancient. You kept me lonely, Sethos, not because you feared for my safety, because you feared what I might become if I remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be spoken to honestly, to be treated as a person and not a symbol. Sethos's expression did not change, but his hands, clasped behind his back, tightened until his claws drew blood from his own palms. I have ruled this dominion for 1,200 years from this chair, Virathan said, and her voice filled the chamber the way fire fills a furnace. I did not survive the HFY War to be managed by a chancellor who mistakes my silence for weakness. She looked at the 6 house leaders. Vote as you will, but know this. I am not diminished. I am not compromised. I am not the Empress you have grown comfortable ignoring. I am Virathan Dorkali. I am the unbroken queen, and I am awake. The vote was not close. 5 of the 6 houses voted in favor of the Empress. The undecided 2 had swung to her side before she finished speaking. Even one of the 3 Sethos had secured changed their vote. The count was 5-1. Sethos was stripped of his title. He was escorted from the chamber by the same guards who had once stood at his command. He did not resist. He did not speak. He walked out in silence, and the doors closed behind him with the sound of something ending. In the days that followed, the court adjusted. It adjusted because courts always adjust, and because the Empress gave them no choice. She opened her schedule. She dismissed 3 advisors who had been installed by Sathos and replaced them with people she chose herself. She invited Ambassador Bennett for a private meeting and told him plainly that the human-dragon relationship would be changing for the better. And she formally appointed Danny Russo as a friend of the throne. It was an ancient title, unused for over 500 years. It carried no political power. It granted no military authority. What it granted was simple and, to the Dragon Court, shocking: permanent, unrestricted access to the Empress. The right to walk onto her floor at any time. The right to sit with her, talk with her, and be in her presence without permission, protocol, or chaperone. The court was baffled. The noble houses whispered. Kira Novak told Danny to just smile and stop fidgeting during the ceremony. He did his best. That night, Danny called Maggie. "How's the job?" she asked. "Fixed the pipes, made a friend, almost got deported. The usual." "Danny, I'm fine, Maggie." "Really? Are you in trouble?" "Not anymore." "Are you going to be in trouble?" "Probably." She sighed the sigh of a woman who had been sighing at her brother for 29 years. "Be careful." "I will." He would not. Later, Danny rode the elevator to the top floor one last time. He carried something wrapped in a cloth, a cake. He had made it in the station's communal kitchen, using whatever alien ingredients he could find that looked close enough to flour, sugar, and butter. The result was lopsided, slightly greenish, and smelled like something between vanilla and engine coolant. Virathen was by the window. The pipe flower was still on her table. She looked up when he entered, and saw the cake in his hands. "What is that?" she asked. "Birthday cake. I know I'm a week late, but the week was kind of busy." He set the cake on the table, produced 2 forks he had taken from the kitchen, and handed one to her. She looked at the cake. She looked at the forks. She looked at Danny. "In 1200 years," she said, "no one has ever brought me a cake." "Well," Danny said, sitting on the floor beside her wheelchair, "that's just bad planning." She took a bite. It was terrible. The texture was wrong, the sweetness was strange, and the greenish color was not encouraging. She took a second bite, then a third. Danny watched her and tried not to laugh. "This is the worst cake I have ever tasted," she said. "Yeah, I know. The alien butter substitute was a gamble. I would like a second piece." He cut her one. They sat together by the window and ate terrible cake. And outside, the stars of the Kethrani Dominion burned in the dark the way they always had. Steady, old, and very far away. But tonight, for the first time in centuries, the view from the observation window did not make the Empress feel small. It made her feel like there was still something out there worth reaching for. Something worth waking up for. Not a war, not a duty, not an obligation owed to history or bloodline or throne. Just a tomorrow. A simple, ordinary tomorrow, with the possibility of company. The Empress of 12 star systems, the unbroken Dragon Queen, who had ruled from a wheelchair for 300 years, looked out at the stars and smiled. It was not for the court, it was not for the cameras, it was not for history.